can be the role probably of Romania and of NATO and of Turkey here? It's a nice question, and it's something that we as experts were talking about in 2015, 2016, I mean all the time after the 2014 especially, that we should not regard Romania only as our partner in the Central Eastern Europe. This is important, of course, but the role of Romania is not only about being part of a broader Europe. For Ukraine, it's much more, and we never, unfortunately, and it's my personal view, we never regarded Romania as a Black Sea state per se. Partially because there was no concept of the Black Sea regional identity or Black Sea regional security complex in general. We mostly developed our bilateral relations, each of our countries, with Brussels, with Washington, with Moscow, but not viewed ourselves as a Black Sea region itself. Partially because in Ukraine we were also mostly looking, I mean in 1990s, even in early 2000s, we were mostly looking either to Moscow or to the west, to kind of Brussels, Washington. The new ideas which have emerged recently, more or less recently in Ukraine, is that we have to develop relations with our regional partners, with our neighbor countries, with our other regional countries, and with the Black Sea states in particular. And if you kind of zoom out and look at what is going on now, we are developing relations with Turkey in a very different paradigm, and I will talk about it a little bit later. We are now having all these kind of Lublin triangle, which is Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine. We are now developing close cooperation with Poland and the Baltic states. We are trying to create new, very practically oriented, narrow formats of cooperation, like Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova for association trio for integration in the European Union. Ukraine, Turkey, Azerbaijan for kind of, and Georgia for some infrastructural projects and for all this energy infrastructure transport sector. Working with different countries within smaller platforms and within smaller formats is beneficial in several ways. First, because it's much easier, it's more flexible, it's sometimes ad hoc cooperation, maybe not institutionalized, but this is also a big plus, because unlike in BSEC, for example, you don't have to have all these procedures and then ongoing conflicts in between different members of this organization, and then, you know, only being focused on some kind of political talks, and that's it. You have aims, you have targets, you have common vision, and you cooperate on particular issues with these different countries. So getting back to Romania, what might be interesting for us is developing closer cooperation with Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey as NATO members, and also as littoral states which are not that much limited by Montreux Convention inter alia in stepping up their presence here. Because in Ukraine, of course, first idea which we always are very vocal about is we want more NATO in the Black Sea. We want more NATO presence in the Black Sea. What we hear next from Turkey is, okay, we have Montreux Convention, so we can't get like American warships or British vessels or whatever in the Black Sea for a long period of time. You have these technical limitations which are outdated because Montreux Convention is 1936 and now we're in 2021, so even the technical characteristics of the vessels have changed a lot, and of course these limitations are very much outdated, but our Turkish partners do not want to hear anything about changing Montreux Convention. So we have to go into those limitations, plus with, of course, the only possibility is rotational basis for non-Black Sea, non-littoral states. When we have Romania on board, Bulgaria on board, Turkey on board, we get more support in creating safer and more secure Black Sea, because dealing with Ukraine is one story, but dealing with NATO members for Russia is another story. And Russia will never dare, despite all rhetorics, despite all these crazy ideas, will never dare to kind of go in war or in this war rhetoric with the NATO members. So for me, the most important part here would be like two main dimensions. Working with Romania within regional platforms would be a very nice option for Ukraine. Bucharest 9, for example, right? 3 Seas initiative, all other platforms. This is something Ukraine wants. And our MFA is very vocal about it. And second part is also developing cooperation on sea, maritime cooperation, and cooperation within the bigger NATO umbrella. Last but not least, Turkey. And thank you, Ukrainian Prison, for putting this all together. I think I will split what I want to say now, knowing what are the questions from you, into 3 big parts. One is basically regional developments, then a bit of separate issues like Romania, Russia, Ukraine, Turkey, of course, and then more precisely on this block with Ukrainian Turkish cooperation, Crimean Tatars. Well, first point, elephant in the room is, of course, Russian Federation. When we speak about the security environment in the Black Sea region and in the Sea of Azov, we always start with Russia and we always end up with Russia. Because this is not something that is still obvious to many partners, unfortunately, even now, even on the 7th, 8th year of war and aggression. Russian tactics and Russian strategy and Russian views of security is not something static, right? This is not something fixed in time. This is not something formulated once and forever. Yes, we had the unique speech of Putin. Yes, we had 2008 war with Georgia, and then illegal annexation of Crimea and Russian aggression in the east of Ukraine. But the general strategy of Russian Federation and the general logics behind its deeds, the concepts, have been changing all of this time. So when something is tried and it doesn't work, the actual concept of Russian strategists change also with the lapse of time. And it's really important to understand and to see it in a broader context and in a broader timeline, in a broader framework. When the concept of so-called Novorossiya did not work, all this kind of Russian Spring, Ruskaya Vesna, Russian-speaking population and so on did not work. If you look at the recent statements, you almost don't see all these kind of rhetorics about we have this kind of one nation, one people, Russians, Ukrainians are the same, and this famous article, which is now was recently published on the Kremlin site, yet there is still this rhetoric about kind of we are all brothers and living together, killing our brothers, but still we are the nation. Other, yes. We are, yes, we love each other, but we kill each other. Anyhow, but I mean this cultural aspect, this language aspect, it proved to be ineffective completely. So now what we see is that Russia has moved from this, also partially because it did not work in Ukraine. Nothing happened as it was expected in Odessa, by the way. You remember the May events in 2014. It did not work in Dnipro, for example, in Kharkiv, in many cities, because independently of which languages Ukrainians speak, independently of what we can discuss in between each other, we do have problems. I mean, many countries, especially in our region, have domestic problems, internal problems. But this does not mean that even those people who may not support or be that much vocal in their support to the Western integration, to the European integration or Euro-Atlantic integration in the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine, this does not mean that it makes them automatically Russia supporters. And I think that was also a huge mistake by Russian strategists and by many others in the West as well, thinking that all those who do not automatically support NATO membership or EU membership of Ukraine, they are kind of pro-Russian. It's a very different story in Ukraine. You know, it's like Ukrainian identities, it's like a cabbage. So you can have different layers of that. You can have those people who, for example, speak Russian language but support Ukrainian so-called nationalist parties or government. You can have people who live in the East, but still they are very much pro-EU, pro-NATO, and those people who live in other regions, other parts of Ukraine, but they have different views of on geopolitics, on foreign policy. So it's really important not to make these generalizations and to understand in each and every situation what the real beliefs and the real arguments behind each of the region and each of the social groups' arguments are. This is one story. The second thing which is important, look what Russia has been doing in the region in general. So it's not only about military aggression, we all know this. There are many different things like hybrid aggression, asymmetric aggression, whatever you can call them, subversive operations, economic aggression, economic blockade. This is also something new that we are now seeing and that we are now witnessing. It's not only about military and political thing, it's also about trying to make this blockade on the sea, for example, of such cities as Mariupol, as Berdyansk in the Azov basin, in the Azov region. It's not only about some incidents on the sea, it's also about creating destabilization in this broader region. And we all perfectly understand that once we have a huge decline in economic activities in the Azov region, for example, and once we have those ship owners, companies who refuse from using Ukrainian seaports and move to other ports in the Black Sea region, this is also kind of economic aggression from the Russian side, because those people who live in Berdyansk, in Mariupol, even in Odessa, in case something happens, in other littoral or kind of border cities of Ukraine, a huge percentage of population work in the companies, in the sectors which are connected to maritime activities and to economic activities via sea routes and sea channels. Once something happens, and once Berdyansk and Mariupol, for example, cannot get this from the sea, like this kind of activities, export, import, working with the foreign companies, with tourists also, there will definitely be social destabilization, because once the economic situation deteriorates, next step is unrest, and many people who are, of course, not satisfied with the Ukrainian government's ineffective policies, being unable to stabilize situation and to solve these foreign problems, so on and so forth. So this is kind of another dimension of Russian hybrid actions against Ukraine and against the region in general, by the way, not only against Ukraine, because the main problems which are now discussed in BSEC, in all these kind of regional platforms, is also always dealing with some kind of problematic agenda. So it's really difficult to move from the negative agenda to positive agenda in the Black Sea, because with all these unresolved conflicts, destabilization, all these provocative moves on the sea, it's impossible to speak about developing regional cooperation in economic activities, in tourism, in any kind of humanitarian even platforms. So we all deal with settling the problems, tackling some issues regarding hard security. And COVID, by the way, does not make things easier. So this is also something to consider. Of course, energy security. I mean, no need to mention, because you said that you were also interested in the energy security, no need to mention about the Nord Stream, about Turk Stream, first planned only as one branch which would go to Turkey, to Turkish market, and then with the second part which is going out to the to Europe as well. So all these projects. This is next step also in energy aggression, energy warfare, if we can call it like this. We always had this kind of blackmailing from Russia was cutting gas supplies and then putting all the blame on Ukraine, and then I mean all these gas wars in 2008, 2009, and in further years. But now it's a new step. It's also kind of economic energy warfare. Then lawfare is also another thing that we are, as experts, all talking about. We now have so many different terms, unfortunately, for different dimensions of this kind of hybrid aggression, because it is in each and every sphere if you look at it. And what I mean by lawfare is first misinterpreting the existing agreements, trying to find the ways to actually change the senses and the terms which were put into the initial original text of these agreements, but also using the lack of legal legislative framework regarding sea law, regarding our borders in the, again, Black Sea and Sea of Azov, to use it against Ukraine, for example. So this is another issue, and this we can also discuss in like hours and hours, how we proceed with this in all kind of international platforms, how we cooperate with our international partners on that, and so on. And again, last point which I'd like to make here is, of course, information security is cyber security, all these things. This is again, very important thing. But what I want to pay your attention to is a look at how the geography of Russian actions is expanding. Look how the policy and how the provocative moves of Russia become more and more assertive, more and more provocative. How we now move from this belt of protracted conflicts in the Black Sea region, Transnistria, Moldova, Crimea, Lugansk and Donetsk regions of Ukraine, Ossetia, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, or Tsin Valley region right in Georgia, and Nagorno-Karabakh, of course, and how now we move to Eastern Mediterranean, to Syria, to Libya, to Russian military build-up in a broader region. This is something that we're now witnessing, and by the way, this is why Turkish stance on Russia has been changing also during the recent times as well. I don't want even to call these conflicts kind of frozen conflicts, because they are not frozen. I mean, take Nagorno-Karabakh, take what is going on in the eastern regions of Ukraine. We still have in Donbass and Lugansk, we still have people being killed once in a while. Then, I mean, this can be, oil can be put into flame at each point, and this is what Russia wants, not to take some stripes of land, but to be able to destabilize partially this or that country, this or that region, and to be able to use this as an open wound, not to let those countries actually move towards more kind of prosperous future, economic development, sustainable development, EU-NATO integration, but rather having to deal with all these internal problems. So basically, when we speak about Black Sea, in general, it's also important to mention the maritime security, maritime aspect here. We kind of used to be focused mostly on this aggression of Russia on the land part of Ukraine, be it Crimea, be it the so-called Donbass region, which I don't also prefer to use as a Donbass, because still there are huge differences between Lugansk region, Donetsk region, and this Donbass concept is again more of a Russian narrative, but still just to simplify, we speak about the huge occupied territories of the Black Sea. Now, 2/3 of Ukrainian territorial waters and Black Sea is being occupied by Russian Federation, which is also important because it's not only Crimea, right? It's also the shelf. It's also the gas and oil reserve there. It's also so-called Vyshki Boyka, which you might have heard about. I mean, the drilling platforms, gas and oil drilling platforms, which have been captured by Russian Federation, and which are now used not only for actually using Ukrainian resources, but also for military activities. Because once in a while some incidents happen, like in 2017, for example, and some aircraft passing over those territories get actually assaulted by Russian forces, right? So it's also important to know that each and every part of the Black Sea now is used for power projection for a broader region. And this is why it matters not only for Ukraine, but also for Romania, for Turkey, by the way, for any other country in the region, because every single part, even the Turk Stream pipeline, is also used for kind of radar systems being stationed there, for gathering intelligence, for declared and undeclared military drills, for declaring blockade of this and best parts of the Black Sea Basin, just because we now have some kind of activities with the Turk Stream, for example. And this is what, when you talk to partners in the Baltic countries, they say this is the tactic that has been used by Russia all the time, because they also have infrastructure, they also have this kind of pipelines, electricity lines, whatever, and every time there is a need to create some kind of incident, here we go, we can use this as a pretext and an argument to say that now you cannot pass through this part of the sea, for example, because you have some works there. Now, after this famous notorious article by Putin about Russian-Ukrainian language and same people and so on, if you pay attention, the Serpent Island was mentioned there, which you might know from the previous times of Ukrainian-Romanian relations, but now in a different pretext. Because when Crimea was occupied and was illegally annexed by Russia, what we heard a lot in different Western articles in different countries was about, well, what about 1950s? What about Crimea was given as a gift to Ukrainian Republic, Soviet Socialist Republic? Crimea does not belong to you just because it was given by Soviet leaders as a nice gesture to Kiev, which is a nonsense in itself. But now what we see in this article that the Serpent Island, this mini island, was given to Ukraine in 1948. So now there is a huge discussion in Ukraine about what might be the future action of Russia regarding the Serpent Island. Will we face another wave of propaganda, of some kind of experts, in quotes, talking about Serpent Island do not belonging actually to Ukraine and being a part of big Soviet Union and then having to become a part of the Russian Federation? That's a nice question, and I think this is something that you might also be interested in just because of the proximity to Romania and all other issues. And Serpent Island does have a very important geostrategic location here, with its proximity to the Danube, with its proximity to the so-called Vyshki Boyka, these drilling platforms, which are now seized by Russian Federation. And in case there is something going on, some military activity going on near the Serpent Island, then we'll have, if you look at the map, we'll have Transnistria here, Serpent Island, then drilling platform, then occupied Crimea, and then all the way going to the eastern part of Ukraine. So basically this northern part, western northern part of the Black Sea Basin will be completely under Russian military control, which is not something we would like to see, of course, going on in our sea.